Hi everybody, and welcome to this new series of videos that I am going to record where I share things that I teach in the context of enterprise and entrepreneurship with all of you so that you can pick them up, teach them, and potentially go away and use them yourself. And I'm going to walk you through some slideshows, some different approaches, some ideas. I'm going to share the materials with you. And I'm basically going to give you everything that I love, enjoy, present, and just let you have it. And hopefully that will prompt some conversation around how different people do things and why certain things might work. I'm really hoping it'll help me to go away and kind of force me to develop my approach. But I think more than anything, I just want to share some really kind of practical, down-to-earth advice with the community, because you are so utterly wonderful, about all the cool stuff that I really love. And I hope that you're going to enjoy these videos and be able to use them, take something from them, and incorporate it into all the awesome work that you're all doing. So without further ado, I have decided to start with a topic which is incredibly close to my heart, and you'll see it on the screen. It's presentation skills. And this is probably one of the things that I teach the most. I do this session maybe 20 to 30 times a year, possibly more. That's my very rough count. And I've done it for a long time because I really understand presentation skills. I coach people on them. And it's something that I'm really passionate about, wanting to help people improve and develop. So I think it's a really interesting topic. It has a lot of moving parts. And in the next kind of 25 minutes, I'm going to share with you my approach, all the slides that I use. I'm going to talk around some of the things that I might do differently in a class, how I'd structure that, and then I'm basically going to let you go off and have it all, and hopefully you find that useful. So let's kick off. When I teach presentation skills, I have a really odd starting point, and that's I like to start by talking about Aristotle. And you might go, why Aristotle? Why start there? Well, because in the 4th century BC, he compiled his thoughts on the art of persuasion in a treatise called Rhetoric. And in Rhetoric, Aristotle notes 3 persuasive appeals: Ethos, Pathos, and Logos. Now, you might say to me, why are we having a history lesson on Aristotle and his views on language and how we talk and how we put arguments forwards? Well, because actually, for me, these are really fundamental to presentation skills. They're the 3 essential qualities that I think every good presentation needs to have to get people to accept your message. So let's unpick them for a second in the way that I would normally do at the beginning of a lecture with my students. First of all, we'll talk about ethos, the credibility of the speaker. Now, it's really key at the start of any pitch or presentation to make it clear why you are a credible person in the room giving this talk. I did it at the start of the talk today that I'm giving to all of you, even though I didn't really need to do it, because hopefully you're all here because you think I'm credible. But you build that credibility out. And that credibility is key because it grounds the audience. It gives them a reason to listen to you. Now, there's a difficult relationship here because at the beginning of any kind of pitch or presentation, you've probably got about 15, maybe 20 seconds to really hook the audience member and get them to listen to you. Often that hook needs to be the story around your pitch. So the way you build this credibility piece is interesting, and lots of people do it in different ways. Some people do it at the very front end. I often like to start my pitch, then throw my credibility out there, then continue with my pitch. So that what I'm trying to do is hook the audience first, then explain to them why I'm the person they should listen to, and then get into the pitch as a whole more structurally. So credibility really hinges on, do the audience know who you are? Do they understand why you're there? Do they think you look the part? Do they believe in you? And there's a fine line here between credibility and arrogance. It's difficult, but everybody judges that differently. When I do this in class, I'll often get different people to share how they might want to put that forwards, to talk about their ideas around what makes somebody credible and what they'd be comfortable saying about themselves. And this can be a really interesting exercise because you quickly find out the kind of confidence levels of people in the room. And that helps you later when you're really trying to get them to present, because it gives you an understanding of where you might need to push somebody a bit more and where you can maybe pull back with some people. The next element is pathos, and this is about the emotional connection with your audience. Presentations and pitches are stories. If a story doesn't emotionally connect with the audience, it's going to fall flat. Think about all the great Disney movies that you really enjoy, or, the great action films, whatever it is that floats your boat. That story grabs you because somewhere you feel an emotional connection to the characters, to their situations, to what's going on. The same is true of a pitch. You need to get the audience to feel that you are passionate, interested, engaged. So often I hear people in pitches talk about the fact that they invest in the person, not the pitch itself. And they invest in the person because they're passionate, interested, and want to be there. That's the person you need to be. You need to communicate that pathos and build it with the audience. Lots of ways you can do that. Language is really key. Have you got really emotive language in your presentation? Are you evoking feelings in your audience? Does your story have a narrative flow? I'll often get people, again, to throw in ideas around how you can do this and what they're comfortable doing. And that, again, helps me to judge. Are some people kind of more in touch with their emotions? They're more happy to talk about them? Do some people need more of a structure in terms of how they're going to do that? Do I need to help them more with their story? Do I need to get them just to come out of themselves a bit more, be a bit more passionate and animated about how they're talking? All of those things come out really around this conversation on pathos. And finally, logos, the logical argument. Now, this is interesting because people often will say to me, why is this not more important? And my answer is very simple. If you can't build an emotional connection with the audience and get them to understand you're credible, you will not get them to take on board any logical arguments that you put forwards. They will shut down, they will be disinterested, they will disengage. So actually, logic can only come in when the other two are already well established in the audience's mind. But logic is key because it helps build out the reasons that somebody might want to engage, invest, build a relationship with you. And in the context of logic, we're really looking at things like, does the pitch make sense? Have we got good facts, stats, and evidence in there? And I'll often get people to talk about what they think is quality, and that can be hilariously interesting. Do people even understand what Mintel, Statista, Market Line Advantage are? These great resources that we have in universities that can be incredibly expensive externally, but actually give them a massive leg up. Do they understand quality news sources? Do they know how to utilize them? Do they know how to use infographics and different ways of presenting things rather than just big chunks? And do they know that within a business presentation, what might be expected of them and what might not be? And I think one point I'll always come back to fundamentally is, if you're doing especially like a business pitch or presentation, is this thing really feasible? If it isn't actually logical itself, if the feasibility is a bit hinky, then the whole thing is not really going to work, and your audience, again, won't connect to it. So ethos, pathos, logos. Credibility, emotional connection, logic. Now, what's really important is that those are there in balance. But as I said, the first two really have to be there as the groundwork to allow everything else to come forwards. Now, with the help of one of my favourite people in the world, Alex Bruton, I have taken on board a model for teaching pitching, which I think really utilises this ethos, pathos, logos structure. And where I start from with students is to teach this, and to teach them this as a 3-minute pitching model. And then once they grasp this, we can build that out, and I'll show you how you do that using the timings and everything. But this is the starting point. And I'll walk them through this model first. So I'll talk about the fact that your first 15 seconds, really important. Your job here, as I've already said, get that story going. Anchor them in your passion, your interest, your belief in why this thing is important and they should listen to it. At that point, build your credibility. Then develop the story further. Why is this something that you've come to? Why are you the right person to deliver it? Those are all really important things. Frame the value. Make sure you know you understand the audience and communicate that clearly. You've got about 60 seconds to do that. Now, assuming that's worked really well, and you should be able to tell from the way your audience is reacting to you. Are they leaning into you? Are they listening more actively? Are they looking at you and really engaging with you? You've got about 75 seconds to build some facts and stats, but within a 3-minute pitch, that can't be hugely detailed. So what are we going to focus on here? Well, Things like market size, competition, revenue. And I'll often ask people to give examples of what they think those are, where they might get them from. And that's a huge conversation that maybe actually I'll cover in another video. How do you size a market? How do you understand what a competitive landscape looks like? How do you think about revenue potential? But in this context, very much it's bringing those elements together and just checking people kind of roughly understand what they are, can talk about them, and getting them to think about the fact that in this particular context, we probably need 1 to 2 of those to make a 3-minute pitch work. And finally, what do you need at the end of it, the close? Ask for support. Is it money? Is it help? Whatever you're there for, you've got to ask for it at the end. And once you've asked for it, the point that isn't on this model, I'll always say to people is you've got to shut up and use silence. And often I'll take a few minutes here to talk about the whole idea of silence being really important in communication. How good salespeople use silence, how good politicians will use it, why it's key to drawing out thoughts from the other side, the people who you are sat across from, and really why at that last moment you really just have to take a second, be quiet, and let everybody else come to you. Now, often what I'll do is I'll go through this model, I'll get people to talk about what they think, what they feel, where they are, how confident they feel in being able to do this. Then I'll show them this scaled up into a 15-minute pitch. So same sort of idea, but I've just changed the timings here, and I'll walk through that a little bit more and kind of what the extended expectations might be for each of those sections. But the key thing I'll emphasize is that at the end of this session, and this session probably takes me between 45 minutes to an hour, with everything all included, war stories that I'll tell, jokes that I add in, some more detail on some of these sections. I'll say that at the end, we're not going to do a 15-minute pitch. What we're going to do is a 3-minute pitch. And normally as a whole, this is a 2-hour session. So we'll start with this slideshow. Then we'll break for about half an hour. And in that half an hour, I'll send people away and say, I want you to prep a 3-minute pitch based on that 3-minute model that we've covered with you. Then I will come back, and in the last half an hour, and that can take longer depending on how many people you're working with, but ideally you're not working with very large groups in this context. Otherwise, you probably just have to do the slideshow and leave it at that, or maybe have people record things onto video and send them in to you. You are going to pitch to us, and we're going to give you feedback. Now, this very much depends on, again, the confidence of your audience. Sometimes I'll do this and the other people don't want to give feedback. Sometimes they're very happy to. I will always lead the feedback process and kind of moderate it. So that if I feel people are going too far off on a tangent, I'll say, well, actually, that's not the point, but you did this really well. I always make it about building people up. It's about giving them compliments. It's about picking out what they did well, and only really drawing on a couple of negatives. Because this is about confidence building. I want people to get more confident about presenting and pitching. So I don't want to cut them down too much. I want to really bring out the things they do really well in that 3 minutes. Often it's less. Often most people get to about 2 and start to fumble. And then I just want to course correct them on a couple of things that will really make a difference. And often, this will be the start of a series of workshops or events that I run with them where I can help them refine that more over time. So once we've got all that grounded in, people know what they're doing, the way I'll frame this is to say, now what I'm going to give you some little hints, tips and tricks that will really add to your overall ability to present and pitch. So first of all, I'll talk about the idea of knowing your audience, understanding the motivations of the people you're presenting to or pitching to, doing some research on them first, how you can do that using sources like LinkedIn, for example, maybe going deeper into, say, their portfolio if it's an investor, and trying to understand kind of how what you've got will fit with them. And that's really important. I'll talk about knowing the premises. If you're going to give a pitch or a presentation, know where you're going to give it. Fundamental, right? I'll use a lot of war stories here to talk about times where I've walked into a room, not quite knowing what I should have been doing or where it is, and the mistakes and challenges I've made of that. So it's a really important point. Do you understand what text there? Do you understand where you're going to be stood? How it's going to all lay out? Because you need to tailor some of your pitch and presentation around that. I'll often talk about the benefits of visualization. For me, this is a huge thing. I've done this for a lot of years. If you ever see me at a conference or at an event, you'll often see me, before I go in to do a presentation, headphones in, I'll be walking around outside, listening to some music. Often for me, it's kind of loud, shouty, heavy metal. I'm grounding myself in my process, in what I know really well. And I'll talk about why that's important. The notion that you need to believe in yourself to do this really well. And you need to have a clear idea that you're going to walk into that room, you're going to own it, and you're going to do really well in whatever context. So I will build this out a lot normally. This is probably a 2 to 3 minute slide. But actually the core message here is visualize success. Believe that you're going to do well, and it will help you hugely. As a presentation coach who's done this for a long time, I know that somebody always forgets one of these 3 elements. They always forget to breathe, they always forget to smile, they always forget to focus. So it's often at this point I'll talk about the importance of breathing exercises, preparatory breathing, warming your voice up, how to use breath within your presentation, especially to avoid things like non-phatic utterances, the ums, ahs, airs. So taking a breath instead of going using a breath if you get lost in your presentation. The funny story I tend to build in here is the Joey Tribbiani from Friends smell the fart acting moment, where Joey talks about if he forgets a line, he'll often go, rethink it, and then come back to it. So it doesn't look like a mistake. And why that's important, because it doesn't throw you off, it doesn't start you apologising, it's put you on that kind of negative spiral. Also, just because if you're well oxygenated, you are more able to process what's going on around you, you are more in control, and potentially you're not going to fall over. I talk about the importance of smiling, being happy, being passionate. You're in that room to pitch. Show people you're passionate. Don't be, ooh. And the importance of really focusing on your audience. Turn off distractions. Don't have your phone with you. Really make sure that for the time you're talking to those people, you are focused on them. And how that if you do those 3 things, you will be far better than 90% of the presentations I certainly see regularly. Voice inflection, this is where I'll talk about kind of using your voice, and I'll often do some little things where I'll do high voice, low voice, play with it differently, show people what the kind of options are, but the importance of pitch to communicate really why, again, you're passionate about something. Here I'll often build in the whole thing about communication is such and such a percentage of what you say, body language and tone, and why it's actually rubbish. It's not good psychology, it's not really built on anything particularly solid, but that your body language, your voice inflection is really key. Now you'll notice in this slideshow I don't have a particular slide on body language. I'll often talk about it as I go through the slideshow, and I kind of drop it in different places. Here's a good point, maybe I'll drop some points in. Sometimes this is online, sometimes it's in person. If it's in person, I can do more with kind of how do you stand, what's comfortable. But often it's a two-way conversation with the audience about understanding how they're comfortable in their own bodies, because the goal of this presentation and teaching people about pitching isn't to make everybody pitch like you. That's a common failing that a lot of pitching presentations make. It's to draw out the things that people are good at, to help them challenge some of the things they may be less confident about, and to really give them a firm bedrock that they can build on to be their own presenter in their own way. So I can't force everybody to use my body language techniques. I'll talk about some common stuff like where you keep your hands, posture, leg position, looking into the audience. I have a slide that you'll see in a second where we touch on that. But I don't go deeply into body language. And when it comes to communication, really my core point is just to debug the idea that there are hard and fast rules. It's important to use your voice. It's important to use your body in a way you're comfortable with. But actually, there's not a rule set that says it's got to be done in a particular way. Rate of speech. I talk quite quickly. Some people don't. It's about understanding what works for you. This is often where I'll start to touch on the idea that practice is really important. Record yourself, watch it back, analyse your pace. If you're too quick in certain areas, slow it down. But also that pace can again be a tool. Sometimes you'll talk quickly. Sometimes you'll slow down to really build emphasis on a particular point. But to remember that within a 3-minute model, it's not a race. Actually, even in that time constraint, we're in a mini marathon, and we need to use our time effectively and not feel like we're rushing. Often when people then come to present, pace is one of the key things you'll pick up on, because it's one of the things that people will not necessarily get wrong, but struggle most with. So that's a really important area to give them advice on to help guide them through. I am blessed with quite a loud voice. I know this. Anybody who's ever seen me in a presentation will know that. I can command quite big lecture theatres. Even today, where I'm a little bit croaky, I can do pretty well with it. But talk about the importance of really turning your voice up to 11, how to use diaphragm breathing I'll often touch on here, so that really you've got the most projection possible, even with an audience, being really not loud, but using your voice forcefully to command the arena that you're in. Eye contact. Keep looking at the audience and why. Eye contact builds relationships. It helps you understand if people are listening to you. And fundamentally, it's just good practice. And I'll often cite the idea that if you see me in lecture theatre, you'll notice that I'm always moving around, I'm always looking at people. And even when I do things online, I'm trying to look into the camera and talk to you as the audience, because if I'm making eye contact with you, you feel that relationship with me. Visuals. I'm sharing the slides for this, and normally I do a whole big thing where I talk a lot around visuals, and I'm not a designer. I'm not a great artist. I don't see myself as something particularly visual. This is where I'm really comfortable. So where do I get my ideas from? Well, I go and look at other people's work, and you'll see on the beginning of this slideshow, I cite the people who inspired it, because I took that design theme from somewhere else. So often I'll go and look at places like SlideShare, Speaker Deck. I'll use Canva. Canva is the best thing I invest in for presentation design. It's one of my favorite tools. I think it's a great use of £100 a year. So I'll talk about all of that and how you can use those tools to really help kind of come up with a visual identity for your pitch, and then to bring it all together, to make it look coherent, but to not be worried that actually, even in this context, you look at this, it's a relatively simple pitch. It doesn't use many colours, few fonts, not a lot of imagery. It's very punchy, very powerful, and it does what it needs to do. It looks great without having to be overly complex or fussy, and actually how paring back can often be useful. Using notes. This is a really simple thing. I often go, don't talk with a script in front of you. If you must, use cue cards, but fundamentally try and practice your pitch so that it seems natural. If you've got 3 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever that time is, and part of that thing is you're asking somebody for money, investment, support, do them the good graces of knowing your pitch well. And if you watch Dragon's Den or anything like that, it's one of the few things that it gets right, I would say. People who go in there know their pitches. Now, not everybody, and people fail on certain things, but generally speaking, they know what they're there to really talk about. So try not to use notes. If you really feel you must, use cue cards a maximum, but try to limit what's on them. It shouldn't be something that you are constantly reading from. Oh, and before I forget, when we talk about visuals, one point I will make, which I missed totally, is I will always say at that point that the presentation is you, not the visuals. You should be able to give the presentation without the visuals, and if you can't, that's a mistake, and that bridges into this whole conversation here. Oh, who'd have thought I'd have forgotten a really important point just there. Practice. Practice makes perfect. Practice is key. Practice is important, and you will hate it is generally the message here. So I talk about how to do that, to video yourself, use your phone, and I talk about kind of how to structure that over a few days. If you've got a week, how you might start on the first day, record yourself, watch it back, reflect on it, improve the presentation. A couple of days later, go through that loop again, and then just before the presentation, probably go through that loop again. So people always challenge me here. They'll always say, well, do you really do that yourself? Yes, I practice all the time. Some presentations I need to practice less because I do them regularly, but I still practice. And that, I cannot stress how much you will hate it, how cringy it is, how awful it can be, but actually it's the best way to learn. If you're not comfortable recording yourself, practice with friends, practice with other people, find other ways to practice, but practice. That's the really important message to get through to people here. And even set things up where you can practice with them. This is a good example of the structure that I would do, because we'd have a practice here. They can watch that back if we recorded the session, if it was online, or maybe if it's in person, I'd offer to record people. But you can always say, look, I'm happy to run other sessions where we practice and we give feedback and we look at how this works, because that's really important. Jokes. This is always my moment where I go, only if you're funny. I'm not particularly funny. I don't think I am. I don't joke around very much. Some people think I'm funny, and that's awesome. I love that. I don't think I am as a person. So I play to quite serious, passionate, story-driven themes rather than going for the quick jokes. And I'll talk about here that, unless you are empirically funny, try to avoid it and don't tell cringy jokes, and be careful, because actually a bad joke can derail the whole thing. Technical problems, well, fundamentally, you should have practiced. Can you do it without a screen? You should always be able to. And again, I'll talk about my strategies here, the fact that I'll always have multiple copies on an online drive, I'll bring a copy in on a memory stick, on my laptop, and that I also bring physical copies. People always think this is an odd one, but if I'm giving a really important picture or presentation, I'll always have physical copies, and I'll always aim to have one physical copy between every 2 people that I'm presenting to. Because I think that's a nice number. If you've got to go and hand them out because actually the screen isn't working or the slideshow is broken, that's a great way to do it. At this point as well, I'll often talk about the idea that really good presenters, the slideshow will always be in a PDF format, never in a PowerPoint, because that will hold all the design elements without you having to worry about different screen sizes throwing them off. So this is always a good point that I pick that up as well as a conversation with the students, just so they're aware of why, and also that we don't really use animation much, actually, that at best we kind of layer things together so they look a certain way, but actually that's the limit of it. This is one of my favorite slides to talk around, never apologize, and why we don't apologize. The thing I really try and reinforce here with anybody who's in one of these sessions with me is that often when you make a mistake, it's never as bad as people think it is. I've made a couple of mistakes here. I'm not going to go back and edit them out of the video because some of them we've made a little conversation around, and some of them fundamentally I think actually add to the character of the video that we're presenting here today. Often when you're in a pitch, if you make a slight mistake and it throws you off a bit, just take a second, take a breath. Use that as an opportunity to recenter yourself. Often, the core thing to remember is that that mistake is never as bad from the audience perspective as it is from yours. Sometimes they've not even seen it, often they don't care. So just move on. Don't start saying sorry, because once you've done that, you're into it'll knock your confidence, and it kind of destroys the whole flow of everything. So don't ever apologize. Have fun. If you're giving a pitch, it should be fun. That communicates again to the audience. It's another way you put your passion out there. But push yourself. I'm pushing myself here today doing this to all of you, because after I've done this, I'm going to have to redevelop this whole slideshow to do something new and original. Shock, yes, if you're comfortable doing that. There are different ways though that we can shock people, but push your boundaries. Do things that are interesting, different, that challenge you, and that show that in the context of the presentation. Obviously, you're following the kind of solid base rules that we've set up, but show people that you can innovate within that context. Because fundamentally, and the final message I always want to leave people with is that for all of this, you should feel free to break these rules. They are things that I have come up with, things that I have learnt, things that I have developed. It doesn't mean they're hard and fast, and lots of people have different perspectives on this. I'd love in the comments of the video to hear your views on how you teach pitching and presenting. Do you use similar techniques and ideas? Do you have something really different or original or cool that I could potentially learn from, or that the other people watching this could learn from too? Because there are simply so many approaches here, so many ways of doing this, and it's one of the reasons I really love this topic. So I hope this has been useful for everybody. In the video comments, you will find a Google Drive link to the slide deck that you can go and take away as well if you want to use this. If you've got any questions, drop them in there as well. I'm happy to answer them. But I hope this has given you an insight into how I teach pitching, why I think it's such a fabulous subject, and why it's something I am so incredibly passionate about. Until we see each other next time, take care, and thanks so much for watching. Bye.